back by popular demand, and I do mean popular, because what the hell is this, guys? I am overwhelmed by the support y'all have shown for my previous video. So, since you asked for the follow-up, here it is. I only had a few topics cut originally, however, I did some more digging to make another interesting iceberg. That said, we're going to switch tones here. The topics I'm going to talk about are rather graphic and gloomy, which is why they were cut previously. So, viewer discretion advised if you're sensitive to topics like death and sexual abuse. With all that out of the way, this is my dark film iceberg explained. Cannibal Holocaust and the Blair Witch Project are both found footage horror films that advertise themselves as being real documentaries. They employed similar tactics, such as hiring unknown actors and then hiding them from the public before the release of their film. And it actually worked. Many audiences were left wondering if they had really just seen people die on screen. In the case of Cannibal Holocaust, it worked a little too well and led to the arrest of director Ruggero Deodato. He would later be released after the actors revealed themselves to be alive. The fact that so many people brought into this myth is quite fascinating and something that I don't think can ever be done again. So, you've probably heard this story before. In 1958, Walt Disney Productions produced a documentary called White Wilderness directed by James Algar. In it, they show lemmings leaping into what they claim as the Arctic Ocean during the course of their migration. Unfortunately, they would all drown. During a 1983 investigation by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, this scene was confirmed to be fake, and the filmmakers simply threw the lemmings off the cliff. While it's true that some lemmings do drown trying to cross rivers and lakes, that's true for a lot of other animals as well. Which begs the question, why even create this scene in the first place? Obey the Walrus is a 2005 eBaum's World video that went viral when it was uploaded to YouTube in 2008. It was rumored to be created by a Latin American cult known as La Morsa, Spanish for the walrus. What makes the video so unsettling is the footage of this woman playing to distorted music, leading to wild myths surrounding who it is and what happened to them. The footage actually comes from the documentary The Goddess Bunny and features trans actress Sandy Crisp, who developed polio as a child. Now, the video description was changed to include this information, so it's pretty well known now. However, in recent years, this video gained notoriety again because of TikTok, making it yet another piece of exploitation the platform latched onto. Great job, guys. There's no real good segue for this, but interesting fact, she actually ran for president in the US 2020 elections, as a serious candidate too. And hey, she makes some pretty good points in my opinion. So if you ever wondered what happened to her since this video, she's doing just fine. Atuk is the name of an unfilmed American screenplay planned for the 1970s. Despite interest from various Hollywood studios, the film remains in development hell. This is due to an urban legend that any actor who shows interest in the lead role meets an unfortunate end. Those affected include John Belushi, Sam Kinison, John Candy, and Chris Farley. It's said that even people who read the script with them are affected, like Michael O'Donoghue and Phil Hartman. Just like other curses in the film industry, this one comes down to just coincidences. People like John Belushi and Chris Farley died from overdoses, however their battles with drug addiction were already well known. Michael O'Donoghue died from a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 54, unsurprising given his history of chronic migraines. Phil Hartman was killed by his wife Bryn Hartman. However, Bryn's drug and alcohol abuse, as well as their turbulent marriage, were already apparent years before Atuk came into the picture. The final nail in this cursed coffin, many other actors have shown interest in the lead role, including Will Ferrell, and unfortunately, he's still alive. All the Money in the World is a 2017 crime film directed by Ridley Scott. However, before its release, 22 scenes of J. Paul Getty had to be reshot. Why? Because the actor portraying him was Kevin Spacey. In October 2017, allegations were made against Spacey by Anthony Rapp, who accused him of sexual advances when he was 14 and Spacey was 26. This would then encourage others to come out with their own allegations. An entire Kevin Spacey cut does exist of this film, but Ridley Scott has refused to release it for obvious reasons. The only footage left are fragments in the trailer. There is an extensive amount of other sexual assault charges against other people in the industry. I do cover a few more notorious ones, but to cover all of them in a video like this would be too daunting, especially trying to condense all that information into just short segments. I'll leave you with the idea that this is still a problem within the industry, and it continues to not be called out, and is just shoved under the rug. Blue is the Warmest Color is a 2013 romance film directed and produced by Abdellatif Kechiche. The film is based on the 2010 graphic novel of the same name by Julie Moreau. The film became controversial over a long, explicit sex scene in the film. According to actress Léa Seydoux, shooting the scene left her feeling like a prostitute, with similar sentiments being felt by her co-star Adele Exarchopoulos. Author Julie Moreau even called the scene a brutal and surgical display, exuberant and cold, of so-called lesbian sex, which turned into porn. Unsurprisingly, Kechiche was offensive about the criticism and even threatened legal action against the actress. And that's pretty much where the story ends. Nothing significant really happened after that, and all we're left with is a pretty uncomfortable film. There's actually a great video by a channel called Dave Scripted which details why the scene doesn't even work from a filmmaking and narrative perspective, that I implore you to all check out. Children of Loneliness is a lost 1937 exploitation film directed by Richard C. Kahn. The film is inspired by the 1928 lesbian novel The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. However, instead of being respectful to the original work, it was a complete mockery. The story included homosexual characters committing suicide and killing each other. Reportedly, some screenings had a doctor come on stage to give audiences pamphlets on how to cure homosexuality. The most unfortunate thing about this film is that it's pretty much the first time homosexuality is represented on film. A truly unfortunate time in history. But at least we can find solace in that the few reviews this film got ripped it to shreds. In 1986, Jeffrey Jones starred in the film Ferris Bueller's Day Off as Vice Principal Edward R. Rooney. He also appeared in other films such as Beetlejuice and Amadeus. In 2002, Jones was arrested for possession of child pornography and accused of soliciting a 14-year-old boy for nude photographs. He pleaded no contest to soliciting a minor, however, at the same time, his charge for possession of child pornography was dropped. This meant that his punishment was just 5 years probation, counseling, and a requirement to register as a sex offender, which he failed to do twice and was arrested for. Despite all of this, Jones still finds work in film and television, with it becoming a controversy on the set of Deadwood, the movie. The Exorcist is a 1973 horror film directed by William Friedkin. During one scene, we see a cerebral angiography being performed. Many consider it to be the most disturbing scene of the film due to its realism. This is because they went to a real medical center and had real professionals perform the scene. One of the technicians present is Paul Bateson. Around the time of shooting, Bateson began drinking again, which would eventually lead to him getting fired from the medical center. In 1977, only 4 years after the film, Bateson would be wanted for the murder of Addison Verrill, a Variety film journalist. He would also become the prime suspect for the serial murders of gay men in the area, although there was no definitive proof of this. Bateson was convicted for the murder of Verrill and sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. In 2003, he was released on parole, which ended 5 years after. His whereabouts are currently unknown, or even if he's still alive. Heartbeat in the Brain is a 1970 documentary film directed by Amanda Fielding, which showcases her performing trepanation on herself. Trepanation is an ancient pseudo-medical procedure in which a hole is drilled through the human skull. This is supposed to treat health problems concerning the cranium and release pressure buildup from blood. The procedure has not been medically proven to work, which is why Fielding failed to find any doctor willing to do it on her for her film. So she did it herself. The film would be publicly screened in 1978 at the Suydam Gallery in New York, and screened only one more time in 2011 at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. Unsurprisingly, the film is now completely lost with only a few screenshots publicly available. The Skyway Man is a 1920 American silent film directed by James P. Hogan. It would also be the second and last film starring stunt pilot Omer Locklear and his co-pilot Milton Elliott. After finding much success with his film The Great Air Robbery, Locklear wanted to continue his Hollywood career instead of going back to the airshow circuit. Locklear was supposed to film 3 stunts for the film, and he successfully pulled off 2. The last stunt was supposed to be a nighttime spin, which was supposed to be filmed during the day with red light filters to simulate darkness. However, after learning that the head of Fox Film Corporations weren't going to extend his contract past this film, he demanded that he be allowed to fly at night, perhaps to win over favor with the studio. The final stunt sparked a lot of publicity, with a large crowd forming for the event. Lights would be used to illuminate the plane and then turned off to signal when Locklear was close to the ground. Unfortunately, the lights would never turn off, causing Locklear to crash in front of the crowd, which even had his girlfriend Viola Dana in attendance. The tragedy, including Dana's reaction, was all filmed, making it the first stunt death caught on film. Because Hollywood is kind of a shitty place, Fox decided to capitalize on this tragedy by rushing the film to be released, and even using the footage in the film. Despite the notoriety and even the efforts of the team behind Traces of Death, no footage has ever resurfaced and the film remains lost. In 1993, actor Brandon Lee, son of Bruce Lee, was filming a scene for the film The Crow. In the scene, Lee was supposed to be shot and killed by some thugs. The gun that was used was loaded with dummy rounds from a previous scene. These types of rounds have a real bullet but no explosive in them, and they're mainly used during close-up shots. The film's prop crew were hampered by time constraints and instead made their own dummy cartridges. At some point during filming, a bullet from the dummy cartridge was driven partway into the barrel and became stuck there. A malfunction known as a squib load. The dummy rounds were then switched with blank rounds, which feature live powder but no bullet. Unfortunately, a prop assistant who was in charge of the gun didn't check the revolver properly enough, and the bullet was left in the barrel. This meant that the bullet would leave the gun with the same amount of force of a real loaded gun. Tragically, Brandon Lee was mortally shot in the abdomen. He was then rushed to the hospital and underwent 6 hours of surgery. Attempts to save his life were unsuccessful, and he would die on March 31st, 1993, at the age of 28. Shark, also known as Caine, is a 1969 film directed by Samuel Fuller and starring Burt Reynolds. The film took place in Sudan, although actually filmed in Mexico, and revolved around a group of treasure hunters. Unfortunately, during production, stuntman Jose Marco was attacked and killed on camera by a shark that escaped protective netting. The tragic event would be used as an ad campaign for the film. This also prompted the film to change its name from Caine to Shark, despite the film having little to do with sharks. Fuller would request to omit his name from the film due to how the tragedy was handled by the studio. Marilyn Monroe was a model and actress best known for her film roles between the 50s and early 60s. What is lesser known is the abuse she suffered from Hollywood in order to get where she was. In a 1953 article titled Wolves I Know, Monroe exposed a lot of sexual exploitation her and other women faced in the industry. A lot of it happened during Hollywood parties where women would be offered roles in exchange for sexual favors. She would describe these places as overcrowded brothels. At the age of 20, Monroe signed a contract with Columbia Pictures. After she had screen tested for the studio, the company's head, Harry Cohn, invited her to his yacht. She said she'd only go if his wife would come along as well. After this, Monroe's contract was dropped. Despite her efforts, the Hollywood system was unavoidable, and she slept with producers to get her roles. She would die on August 4, 1962 from a barbiturate overdose, a drug many Hollywood actresses were encouraged to take. We'd like to believe that this sort of exploitation is a thing of the past, however it really isn't. We live in a sad reality where this stuff still happens today. The Twilight Zone the movie is a 1983 sci-fi horror anthology film. On July 23, 1982, during the filming of the Time Out segment by John Landis, a helicopter crashed on set, killing actor John Moreau and child actors Mika Din Lee and Renee Shin-Yi Chen. The scene comprised of Moreau taking the kids across a river while a helicopter pursued them. An explosive effect was set off early and hit the helicopter, causing it to spin out of control until eventually falling on top of the victims. Moreau and Lee were decapitated while Shen was crushed to death by one of the struts. All of this was recorded, although no footage would be used in the final film. Worst yet, the two child actors were hired in violation of California child labor laws. The law prohibits children from working at night or within proximity of explosions. Director John Landis opted not to seek a waiver and instead paid them under the table. The accident led to civil and criminal action against Landis, which lasted nearly a decade. He was acquitted of manslaughter charges in 1987. In the 1996 interview, Landis spoke about the accident, saying, "The tragedy, which I think about every day, had an enormous impact on my career, from which it may possibly never recover." Poor little John Landis. In 1997, South Korean martial artist and actor Jo Sun played Random Task in Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. This would be his best known role and his final role in film. In 2008, he was taken into custody for felony vandalism and was sentenced to probation and 60 days in jail. Later that same year, he was taken into custody due to a probation violation. It was here when Sun was required to provide a DNA sample. In October of 2008, Sun's DNA would be linked to a 1990 Christmas Eve gang rape. Unfortunately, initial charges against Sun were dropped due to the statute of limitations expiring. He was then charged with conspiracy to commit torture and murder, which he was found guilty of and given 7 years to life in prison. In October of 2011, Sun was accused of killing his cellmate, Michael Thomas Graham, which he was found guilty of and received a 27-year sentence for. He was then moved to solitary confinement, where he remains now. Noah's Ark is a lost 1928 silent film about the famous biblical story. The film is infamous for a very intense flood scene. Since this was early in film history, safety precautions weren't implemented well or at all. The flood would claim the lives of 3 extras, severely injured another, and almost claimed the life of a young John Wayne. Supposedly, the film premiered with footage of people who died in the flood. The outrage from the audience forced the studio to cut out 35 minutes of the scene and only use footage where extras survived. This new cut is the only version that remains today, with the other cut being lost. The tragedy of this film was instrumental for developing stunt safety precautions now. The Conqueror is a 1956 film by Dick Powell and starring John Wayne. Parts of the film would be shot in Utah locations such as St. George. This was downwind of the Nevada National Security Site. In 1953, only 3 years prior, 11 above-ground nuclear weapons tests occurred at that site. This meant that 220 film crew members were exposed to nuclear fallout from the area. The filmmakers were aware of the nuclear testing, but the government assured them that they posed no hazard to public health. 91 crew members developed cancer in their lifetime, 46 of which died from it, including the director and Wayne himself. Some people have brought up the statistic that 40% of men develop cancer in the US, and that 23 die from it. This statistic lines up with the crew members, of which 41% develop cancer. Whether the crew developed cancer from the location or from just coincidence, I'll leave up to you to decide. Victor Salva is an American filmmaker best known for his commercially successful Jeepers Creepers trilogy. However, what he should best be known for is being a pedophile. In 1988, Salva was convicted of sexual misconduct during the set of his feature film Clown House. He had oral sex with a minor under 14 years old and even videotaped the event. Child pornography was also found at his home. Salva would plead guilty to the charges brought against him and was sentenced to only 3 years in state prison, of which he only served 15 months. He would then complete his parole in 1992. Victor Salva still finds consistent work and has even broken box office records with his Jeepers Creepers series. Shirley Temple was an American actress best known for her films from the mid-30s. Despite being recognizable now, I'd wager many haven't seen her films, and they're quite problematic. Her first role began in a short series titled Baby Burlesques. They were 10-minute shorts that satirized films and events and used preschool children in every role. At 4 years old, she got her first speaking role in the short War Babies, where she played a prostitute. They even had her kiss other babies for the film. As an adult, Temple would describe the short films as a cynical exploitation of our childish innocence. Her feature film roles were no better. Film critic Graham Greene noted that in most films, Temple wore tight, suggestive clothing that emphasized her figure. Furthermore, her film usually had her acting in a suggestive manner towards older men. Things weren't better for her outside of film either. During a Larry King interview, she explained that in 1941, at the age of 12, she planned to make comeback films with studio MGM. During an interview, MGM producer Arthur Freed exposed himself to her. Not knowing what to do, she nervously laughed, which caused Freed to kick her out of his office and end their contract. She would eventually abandon her film career and instead focus on being a politician. A wise choice since she was almost cast for The Wizard of Oz. Who knows how her life would have turned out if that happened. Midnight Rider is a 2014 unfinished film revolving around the story of Greg Allman, member of the band the Allman Brothers. Production for the film swiftly ended on the first day. On February 20th, 2014, the crew was filming on a railroad bridge in Wayne County, Georgia. Producers of the film asked for permission to film on the railroad, but was denied both times. However, they went ahead with it anyways. Unfortunately, as they were filming, a train was quickly approaching, and the small crew scrambled to save the equipment. They failed to move a metal bed, which the train struck and sent shrapnel flying everywhere. These fragments struck camera assistant Sarah Jones, causing her to propel forward and hit the oncoming train. She was killed immediately. Producers attempted to continue production, however, various crew members voiced their opposition, with singer Greg Allman even filing a civil suit to halt the film. While technically still in production, it does not seem likely that the film will ever be worked on. Cannonball Run is a 1981 film directed by Hal Needham. During production, stuntwoman Heidi Von Beltz would become critically injured from a car crash on set. The car used for the stunt had various mechanical problems, one of which was a lack of seatbelts. During the stunt, the car crashed head-on with a van, breaking Von Beltz's neck and leaving her quadriplegic. After 6 months in the hospital, Von Beltz would file a personal injury lawsuit against Hal Needham and his company. Stunt coordinator Bobby Bass testified against her, stating that the production thought the car was safe. Bass had actually been her fiancé, but had abandoned her after the accident. She was eventually awarded $7 million, although a judge reduced that amount to $3.4 million. Most of the money would go to her lawyers and her medical expenses. This lawsuit would also result in seatbelt requirements in all movie productions. Unfortunately, her suffering didn't really end there. In 1997, her mother passed away, and 2 years later her father would commit suicide. One of the last things he would say to her was, "Do you want to go too?" She was then left in the care of her sister, who bought a ranch-style home for them. Unfortunately, medical costs would continue to strain them, and they would lose the house in 2011. During the last 4 years of her life, she would live in a small apartment in declining health. In 2015, she passed away after going into cardiac arrest following surgery. A life completely shattered, all for just one scene. The Adventures of Milo and Otis is a 1986 Japanese film directed by Masanori Hata. It follows the lives of a cat named Milo and a pug named Otis. In the same year, Columbia Pictures released an English dub of the film. This was sadly one of my favorites growing up. The film is now notorious for cases of animal cruelty. 20 cats and dogs died during production. A dog was even eaten by a bear during a fight scene. Despite all of this, the film would be the third highest grossing film in Japan of that year. A dark secret veiled by an innocent atmosphere. Or at least that's what I thought. Upon further inspection into this case, things started getting a little more complicated. The allegations that 20 cats and dogs died come from the Sunday Mail, a tabloid newspaper based in Australia. In fact, the newspaper was covering claims from people who had only seen the film. It also covered reports from Europe that animals had been injured to make them seem unsteady on their feet. It's not clear who from Europe these reports come from. As for claims of the bear eating the pug, there is no source for this. In fact, many of the allegations you'll hear about don't have a source. So, is this film made humanely? That is still questionable. You see, the film did have the approval by the American Humane Society, however, no actual officer was present during filming. Then the society launched their own investigation. They asked sources from Europe about the animal cruelty allegations, and they could not verify that they were true. Again though, we don't know who these sources are. The investigation eventually reached a dead end, with no real way to conclude if the film did indeed kill its animals. So now there's just the film, and honestly, it employs some pretty reprehensible practices. If no animal died, then at the very least the animals were traumatized by the production. I've seen it quite a few times growing up, and I know that I would never let my own cat be in this film. So what's my conclusion? Well, I have conflicting emotions. On one hand, I condemn this film for what it put these animals through. However, the intense allegations many throw at this film are not sourced nor confirmed, and it would be inappropriate to continue spreading them. It's a very unsatisfying conclusion. At the very least, I've learned one thing. No matter the topic or medium, we should always look at something deeper than surface level. It feels weird to have an outro for this type of video, but here we are. You can kind of see why these topics didn't really make the cut the first time. Too much death and exploitation for a video that I wanted to be more intriguing. On that note, this is going to be my last iceberg. However, we're both in luck. Y'all are probably here because you like interesting and bizarre topics in film. Well, that's exactly what I do here. So I hope you guys stick around for those videos. Follow me on Twitter for updates and to see how I freak out over this whole YouTube thing, and I'll see you next time.